The old power plant stood as a crumbling monument to a bygone era. Once the lifeblood of a thriving industrial town, it had been abandoned for decades, a relic shrouded in rust and whispers. Its skeletal frame loomed against the horizon, bathed in the eerie glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in anticipation. 4 engineers stood at the edge of this desolate place, their silhouettes stark against the dying light. They had been dispatched by their company to evaluate the feasibility of restoring the plant to operational status. The team consisted of Marcus, the team leader, a man of few words, but with a sharp mind and a wealth of experience. Lena, the electrical engineer, whose curiosity often bordered on reckless. Javier, the mechanical expert, a practical man who believed in solid facts and figures. Tom, the rookie, fresh out of university, eager and slightly nervous. As they approached the rusted gates, an unnatural chill crept over them, setting the hairs on the back of their necks on edge. The air was thick with the scent of decaying metal and something else, something they couldn't quite place. A faint, acrid smell that lingered in their nostrils. "Let's get this over with," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. He pushed open the gate with a creak that echoed ominously in the stillness. They stepped inside, their footsteps reverberating off the cold, hard concrete. The interior was a labyrinth of twisted metal and broken machinery. Darkness pooled in the corners, and their flashlights barely pierced the gloom. The power plant's control room was their first destination. They made their way there, passing by rows of defunct generators and control panels coated in dust. Inside the control room, they found old schematics and logs. Lena pored over them, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This place has been dead for years," she muttered. "It's a miracle anything's still intact." Javier moved to the main control panel, attempting to power it up. "Let's see if we can get some lights on," he said, flipping switches and turning dials. For a moment nothing happened. Then, with a shuddering groan, the machinery sputtered to life. Dim, flickering lights buzzed overhead, casting long, wavering shadows. As the lights came on, a strange hum filled the air. It was barely perceptible at first, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Tom shivered, rubbing his arms. "Does anyone else hear that?" he asked. Lena nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room. "It's probably just the old wiring. This place is ancient." But the hum persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from deeper within the plant. Marcus frowned, checking the schematics. "There's an auxiliary generator room down that corridor," he said, pointing to a darkened passageway. "We need to check it out." Reluctantly, they made their way down the corridor. The hum grew louder with each step, resonating in their chests. The passage was narrow, the walls closing in around them. Their flashlights flickered, casting eerie, shifting patterns on the walls. At the end of the corridor, they found the auxiliary generator room. The door was ajar, and the hum was almost deafening now. Marcus pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The room was dominated by a massive generator, its metal casing scarred and blackened, but it was the figure standing in front of it that made them freeze. It was humanoid, but not quite human. Its body was composed of swirling, crackling energy, its form constantly shifting and morphing. Eyes of pure electricity stared at them, filled with an insatiable hunger. The entity turned its gaze upon them, and the hum became a roar. It surged forward, tendrils of electricity lashing out. Marcus shouted a warning, but it was too late. The tendrils wrapped around Lena, and she screamed as the energy coursed through her, lifting her off the ground. Javier lunged forward, trying to pull her free, but the entity's power was too great. Lena's body convulsed, her eyes wide with terror. Then, with a final, agonized scream, she was consumed, her body disintegrating into a cloud of ash and sparks. "Run!" Marcus shouted, grabbing Tom's arm and pulling him towards the door. Javier followed, his face pale with shock. They raced down the corridor, the entity's roar echoing behind them. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Their flashlights cast frantic beams as they navigated the twisting passageways. "Where are we going?" Tom panted, his voice trembling. "Outside," Marcus replied, his grip tight on Tom's arm. "We need to get out of here." But the plant seemed to conspire against them. Corridors that should have led to the exit twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the maze. The hum of the entity followed them, a relentless pursuit. They burst into another room, slamming the door shut behind them. Marcus leaned against the door, his breath ragged. "We can't keep running." We need a plan. Javier nodded, his eyes darting around the room. This place is a death trap. If we can get to the main generator, maybe we can overload it. Blow the whole place, and that thing with it. It's a risk, Tom said, his voice shaking. We might not make it out. Marcus looked at him, his expression grim. We don't have a choice. With renewed determination, they made their way towards the main generator. The plant seemed to pulse around them, the entity's presence palpable. It was as if the very walls were alive, watching, waiting. They reached the main generator room, their hearts pounding. The generator loomed before them, a monstrous, hulking machine. Javier moved to the control panel, his hands trembling as he worked to overload the system. The hum grew louder, a crescendo of energy and malice. The entity was close, too close. It surged into the room, its form blazing with power. Tendrils of electricity lashed out, striking Javier. He cried out, his body convulsing as the energy consumed him. "Javier!" Marcus shouted, but it was too late. Javier's body disintegrated, his scream echoing in their ears. The generator began to overload, sparks flying, machinery groaning. "We need to go, now," Marcus yelled, grabbing Tom and dragging him towards the exit. They raced through the plant, the walls shaking with the force of the impending explosion. The entity's roar followed them, a promise of death. They burst through the doors and into the open air, the night cold and still. Behind them, the power plant shuddered, a deafening roar splitting the air. Flames erupted, and the building collapsed in on itself, a massive explosion lighting up the night sky. Marcus and Tom lay on the ground, gasping for breath, their faces smeared with soot and sweat. The plant was gone, reduced to a smoldering ruin. The entity was destroyed, but at a terrible cost. They sat in silence, the enormity of what had happened settling over them. Marcus stared at the ruins, his mind numb. They had survived, but the price had been high. In the distance, the first light of dawn began to break, casting a pale glow over the landscape. The nightmare was over, but the memory of it would haunt them forever. Tom broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it could come back?" Marcus shook his head, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "No," he said, his voice firm. "It's gone." But as the dawn light washed over the ruins, a faint hum echoed in the air, a lingering reminder of the entity that had once dwelled within the heart of the old power plant. And somewhere, deep within the wreckage, something stirred, waiting for the day it would awaken once more.